The first thing I heard after waking from a coma wasn't a doctor's voice. It wasn't a nurse telling me I was safe. It was my mother whispering words that made my blood run cold.
Finally, she said.
Now everything can go back to normal. I wanted to open my eyes and ask what she meant, but something stopped me. Then another voice answered her. The conversation that followed revealed a secret my family had been hiding for years. As I lay there pretending to be unconscious, I realized my accident wasn't the biggest tragedy in my life. The truth was, the last normal day of my life began with coffee, blueprints, and a phone call from my father. "Dinner tonight," he said cheerfully. "Your mother insists." That alone should have warned me something was wrong. My name is Emily Carter. I was 32 years old and worked as an architect in Chicago. My life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I had a career I loved, good friends, and a father who had always been my biggest supporter. My relationship with my mother was different. We were polite. We attended birthdays and holidays together. We smiled in photographs. But beneath the surface, there was always distance. She seemed to find fault with nearly everything I did. I learned long ago not to take it personally. That evening, I arrived at my parents' house carrying a bottle of wine. My father greeted me with a hug. My mother barely looked up from the dining table. Dinner started normally enough. Then the argument happened. It began when my father mentioned meeting with his attorney earlier that week. The room instantly changed. My mother's smile disappeared. "What exactly did you discuss?" she asked. "Just updating paperwork," my father replied casually. "What paperwork?" "Nothing important." The tension that followed felt suffocating. My father changed the subject. My mother let it go. Or, at least she pretended to. The rest of the evening felt strange. Every glance between them seemed loaded with meaning I couldn't understand. When I finally left around 10, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened. Rain was falling as I drove home. The streets were nearly empty. I remember stopping at a red light. I remember checking the clock. 10:47 p.m. Then headlights appeared. Too fast. Far too fast. A truck blasted through the intersection. The impact sounded like an explosion. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. Pain flashed through my body before everything disappeared into darkness. The world faded away. But somewhere far beyond the silence, distant voices remained. And although I couldn't understand the words, I had the terrifying feeling that someone was talking about me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Everything felt distant. Sound reached me through layers of fog, as if I were trapped underwater listening to people speak from the surface. Voices came and went. Machines beeped steadily somewhere nearby. Occasionally, I heard footsteps crossing a room. Then one day, the fog began to thin. A woman's voice spoke clearly. "Her vitals look stronger today." Another voice answered. "That's encouraging. 6 weeks is a long time, but patients have recovered after much longer." 6 weeks. The words slammed into me. 6 weeks? I wanted to move. I wanted to open my eyes and demand answers. Nothing happened. My body felt impossibly heavy. Panic rose inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I listened. Over the next few days, I learned more. I was in a hospital. The accident had left me unconscious. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. They spoke about neurological responses, recovery timelines, and physical therapy. Most importantly, they believed I still couldn't hear them. So everyone spoke freely. My father visited every day. I recognized his voice immediately. Sometimes he read newspaper articles aloud. Sometimes he talked about ordinary things. The weather, sports scores, stories from the neighborhood, anything to fill the silence. His voice always sounded tired, exhausted, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. My mother visited too, but something felt different whenever she entered the room. Her concern sounded rehearsed, carefully measured, almost performative. One afternoon, she sat beside my bed while my father stepped out to speak with a doctor. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then I heard her sigh, a long, frustrated sigh. "Everything has become so complicated," she muttered. I frowned internally. Complicated? A door opened. Another person entered. I recognized my Uncle David's voice. Any updates? He asked quietly.
No. Good.
The single word sent a chill through me. Good? Why would that be good? My mother lowered her voice. So far, she hasn't regained consciousness. Then we still have time, David replied. Several seconds passed. Then my mother whispered something that changed everything. She must never find out. Silence filled the room. My heart pounded wildly. Find out what? For the first time since waking inside my own body, I wasn't afraid of the accident anymore. I was afraid of my family. That conversation changed everything. Before hearing my mother and Uncle David whisper beside my hospital bed, my only goal had been recovery. Now I had a second goal: find out what they were hiding. The next morning, when a nurse checked my vitals and spoke encouragingly about progress, I stayed completely still. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't react. If my mother believed I was unconscious, she might reveal more. So I waited and listened. 3 days later, my patience paid off. Late in the afternoon, I heard familiar footsteps enter the room. My mother. A few seconds later came Uncle David. The door clicked shut behind them. Your husband still doesn't suspect anything? David asked. No, my mother replied. He spends all his time worrying about Emily. That makes things easier. I felt my stomach tighten. Easier for what? Papers rustled. A chair scraped across the floor. Then David spoke again. The attorney keeps asking questions. He won't find anything, my mother said. He already noticed documents are missing. A long silence followed. Missing documents? I concentrated on every word. We should have destroyed them immediately, David muttered.
No.
That would have created suspicion. What if Emily wakes up? She knows nothing. My mother's confidence unsettled me. She sounded certain. Certain that whatever secret existed had remained hidden for years. David lowered his voice. We need this resolved before the inheritance process begins. Inheritance. The word hit me like another collision. Inheritance? What inheritance? Neither of my parents had ever mentioned anything like that. I listened harder. The new will changes everything, David said. I know. If your husband finds out what was added, we're finished. My mother's response came instantly. He won't. The certainty in her voice frightened me. I heard more papers moving. Then David sighed. All of this because your husband suddenly changed his mind. He should have left things alone. For several moments, neither spoke. Then my mother said something that made my heart race. The accident delayed everything, but it also created an opportunity. An opportunity. The room fell silent. I couldn't move.
Couldn't speak.
Couldn't open my eyes. But in that moment, I realized my accident wasn't the center of the story anymore. Whatever my family was planning had started long before the crash. After that conversation, every visit became a source of information. I stopped measuring time by daylight or hospital routines. Instead, I measured it by voices. Who entered, what they said, what they accidentally revealed. A week passed before I heard the next piece of the puzzle. My mother arrived alone that morning. She thought nobody was listening. Richard never should have changed it, she muttered. The name caught my attention immediately. Richard was my father. She paced across the room. I could hear her heels tapping against the floor. He had 30 years to make peace with it. A few minutes later, Uncle David arrived. The conversation resumed instantly. Did you find anything in his office? David asked.
No.
What about the safe? Locked. David cursed under his breath. Then the updated documents are probably still there. Updated documents. Again. The same missing pieces kept appearing. I remained motionless while they continued talking. Once Emily wakes up, everything becomes complicated, David said. She won't know where to look. Her father might tell her. My mother's answer came cold and immediate. He won't have the chance if we solve this first. A chill ran through me. Solve what? For several moments, neither spoke. Then David lowered his voice. The new will gives Emily controlling interest. My heartbeat accelerated. Controlling interest? In what? The company, the investments, everything, David continued. Richard practically handed her the keys. Mother sounded furious. She doesn't deserve all of it. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't concern. This wasn't grief. This was resentment. Years of resentment. Richard always favored her, Mother said bitterly. She was his perfect daughter. David sighed. Complaining won't change the paperwork. No, she replied quietly. But paperwork can disappear. The words hung in the air. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then David said something that made my stomach knot. At least the accident bought us time. More time than we expected, Mother answered. Neither sounded relieved that I was alive. Neither sounded grateful I might recover. They sounded disappointed that I might wake up before they got what they wanted. For the first time, a terrifying possibility entered my mind. Maybe they weren't simply taking advantage of my accident. Maybe they had been waiting for something like it to happen. And that thought refused to leave. Lying motionless in that hospital bed gave me something I hadn't expected.
Time.
Time to think. Time to remember. And the more I reflected on my childhood, the more small details began fitting together in ways they never had before. Growing up, I had always believed my mother simply had a stronger bond with my cousin Michael. He was Uncle David's son, only 3 years older than me. At every family gathering, she praised him. Michael's grades, Michael's achievements, Michael's future. Whenever I accomplished something, my father celebrated. My mother compared. I never understood why. Back then, I assumed it was harmless. Now I wasn't so sure. One afternoon, while I pretended to sleep, I heard my mother speaking on the phone. Her voice sounded frustrated. No, Michael still doesn't know. A pause. He expects everything to stay the same. Another pause. My pulse quickened. Everything? What exactly was supposed to stay the same? I spent years helping that family, she continued. Years making sure David and Michael would be protected. Protected from what? The conversation ended before I could learn more. But it wasn't the last clue. 2 days later, Uncle David returned. The moment he entered, the complaint started again. Michael keeps asking questions, he said. Then stop answering them. He thinks the company should eventually belong to him. Mother sighed heavily. That's what everyone expected. Expected. The word echoed in my mind. Suddenly, dozens of old memories resurfaced. Birthday dinners where Michael sat beside my grandfather. Holiday gatherings where relatives joked about him becoming the family's future leader. Conversations that had seemed insignificant at the time. Now they felt different, deliberate,
Planned.
a narrative built over decades. And then my mother said something that shattered whatever hope I still had. Richard ruined everything when he changed his mind about Emily. Changed his mind. Not changed his will. Changed his mind about me. As though I had been some obstacle standing in the way of another plan. A plan that apparently existed long before my accident. Long before I ever knew there was anything to inherit. For years, I thought my family had secrets. Now I understood something much worse. They had expectations. And when my father refused to follow them, resentment turned into something dangerous. Something that was growing with every passing day. By the beginning of the 3rd week after I regained awareness, I knew 2 things for certain. First, my mother and Uncle David were hiding something connected to my father's updated will. Second, my father had no idea how serious the situation had become. Unlike the others, he never whispered. He never schemed. Whenever he visited, he spoke openly. One afternoon, he sat beside my bed for nearly an hour. His voice sounded tired but warm. "You're stubborn, Em," he said softly. "Always have been." I wished more than anything that I could answer him. Tell him I was awake. Tell him I could hear every word. Instead, I remained still. He chuckled quietly. "You know, the doctors say you might surprise everyone." A pause followed. Then his tone changed. Not fearful. Frustrated. "I just wish I could find that file." My attention sharpened instantly. The file. The same missing file my mother and uncle kept discussing. Father sighed heavily. "I've searched the office 3 times. Office. Safe. Documents. Every clue pointed to the same mystery. I know I put it somewhere secure," he continued. "Now it's gone." The door opened. A nurse entered briefly before leaving again. My father waited until she was gone. Then he spoke in a lower voice. If you wake up soon, maybe you'll remember. Remember what? I wanted to scream the question. Instead, I listened.
There was a reason I told you about it.
Another pause. I just can't remember exactly where. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his voice. The accident had affected him too. Not physically. Emotionally. He sounded exhausted from carrying the burden alone. After he left, I spent hours replaying every word. Then, 2 days later, another conversation changed everything. My mother and Uncle David entered late in the evening. They sounded agitated. The attorney is getting closer, David whispered. Then we need the file now. We've searched everywhere. A chair scraped across the floor. Then David lowered his voice even further. Richard always hides important documents behind the bookshelf in his office.
Silence.
My heart pounded. The bookshelf. Finally. A real location. A real lead. For weeks, I'd been collecting fragments of a puzzle. Now, I had my first concrete piece. And judging by the panic in their voices, whatever was hidden behind that bookshelf was important enough to make them desperate. The following week brought the first real sign that my body was catching up to my mind. It started with a finger, just a slight twitch, barely noticeable. But when the nurse asked me to squeeze her hand, I felt my fingers respond. Not much, just enough. The excitement in her voice was impossible to miss. That's progress. For the first time since waking inside my silent prison, hope pushed through the fear. Every day afterward, the improvements continued. Tiny movements, stronger responses, longer periods of awareness. The doctors grew increasingly optimistic. And unfortunately for my mother and Uncle David, they weren't shy about sharing that optimism. One afternoon, I heard my physician speaking outside my room. Recovery could happen sooner than expected. Those 6 words changed everything. Because later that evening, my mother stormed into the room. She wasn't alone. Uncle David followed close behind. Did you hear what the doctor said? He whispered. Yes. We're running out of time. For several moments, neither spoke. Then my mother let out a shaky breath. If she wakes up before we find the file, we're finished. David sounded equally nervous. We need another plan. What plan? The attorney. My attention sharpened immediately. The attorney again. The mysterious person who kept appearing in their conversations. He knows too much, David continued. Not yet. He's asking questions about the missing paperwork. Mother paced across the room. I could hear every step. He still doesn't have proof. He doesn't need proof if Emily starts talking. The statement almost made me open my eyes. Talking? What did they think I knew? David lowered his voice. Maybe we're overreacting. No, Mother snapped instantly. You didn't hear Richard last week. Silence followed. Then David asked carefully, what did he say? Mother hesitated. He told me that if anything happens to Emily, everything goes directly to her. Everything. There was that word again. The company, the investments, the inheritance. Whatever my father had changed, it mattered far more than I originally imagined. Then David said something unexpected. Maybe we should tell Michael.
No.
The answer came immediately. Why not? Because Michael talks. For the first time, I sensed genuine panic in her voice. The carefully controlled confidence was disappearing. Their timeline was shrinking. My recovery was accelerating. And whatever secret they had spent years protecting was beginning to slip through their fingers. 2 days after my mother's panic-filled conversation with Uncle David, someone new entered my hospital room. I recognized the voice immediately. Thomas Bennett, my father's closest friend, and the family's attorney. I'd known him since childhood. He attended birthdays, graduations, and holiday dinners. To me, he was practically family. But judging from previous conversations, he was also the person making my mother increasingly nervous. He greeted my father first. How is she today? Better, my father replied. The doctors are encouraged. Good. Unlike everyone else, Thomas sounded genuinely relieved. For several minutes, They discussed my recovery. Then the conversation shifted. The room grew quieter, more serious. I found something strange, Thomas said. My father immediately asked, about the missing documents? Yes. My pulse quickened. Thomas continued, the timeline doesn't make sense. What do you mean? The file disappeared 3 days after Emily's accident. Silence filled the room. I could almost feel my father's confusion. How do you know that? Because I personally delivered the updated paperwork to your office. Another silence. Longer this time. I remember that, my father said slowly. Then someone accessed the office afterward. My father's chair shifted. You think it was stolen? I think someone was looking for something very specific. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Thomas lowered his voice. Richard, has anyone besides you known about the changes? A pause. Then my father answered, only Emily. My heart skipped. Only me? But I couldn't remember any conversation about a will. The accident had erased parts of that period from my memory. Thomas sighed. Then whoever took the file knew enough to be dangerous. Dangerous. The word hung heavily between them. My father sounded unsettled. Do you suspect someone? I don't make accusations without evidence. Another pause followed. Then Thomas added something that immediately caught my attention. But I requested building security records. My father's voice sharpened. Security records? Who entered your office building after hours? Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then Thomas continued. I should have answers soon. For the first time since waking, I felt something other than fear. Hope. Because if someone truly had taken those documents, evidence might exist. And judging by the confidence in Thomas Bennett's voice, he was getting closer to the truth than my mother and Uncle David realized. Much closer. After Thomas Bennett mentioned the security records, everything seemed to accelerate. The conversations around my hospital bed became shorter, more cautious, more nervous, especially when my mother and Uncle David visited. They no longer spoke as freely as before, but fear has a way of making people careless. And careless people reveal things. 3 days later, they arrived just before sunset. The moment the door closed, David spoke. Thomas is digging deeper. Mother sounded irritated. Let him dig. He requested building access logs. The silence that followed told me everything. For the first time, neither of them had an immediate answer. Finally, Mother spoke. That doesn't prove anything. No, but if he finds the footage. Her voice sharpened instantly. What footage? The security cameras. A cold chill ran through me. Security cameras. The same evidence Thomas had hinted about. David lowered his voice. The office lobby records every visitor. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Mother whispered something I had never heard from her before. Maybe we made a mistake. The admission stunned me. Not because she felt guilty. Because she sounded scared. Truly scared. David wasn't any calmer. If Thomas connects everything, we're finished. Then stop panicking. You think Richard won't notice? Mother didn't answer. That silence was louder than any words. The next afternoon, my father arrived. For once, he sounded different. Not exhausted. Focused. Determined. He sat beside my bed and spoke quietly. Thomas found something interesting today. My heartbeat quickened. He thinks the missing file wasn't the only thing taken. A pause followed. He believes someone entered my office multiple times. Multiple times. The situation was even bigger than I thought. My father sighed. I don't know who did it yet. Then his tone hardened. But I intend to find out. For the first time in weeks, I heard confidence instead of confusion. Someone was finally pushing back. Someone was finally asking the right questions. Before leaving, my father said one final thing. Almost as if he knew I could hear him. I've scheduled a family meeting next week. My pulse immediately accelerated. A family meeting. Everyone together. My mother, Uncle David, Michael, Thomas, my father, and maybe me, because by then I wasn't just listening anymore. I was getting stronger every day. And something told me that when that meeting happened, secrets hidden for years were finally going to collide with the truth. The morning of the family meeting arrived with an unexpected realization. I was ready. Not emotionally, not mentally, physically. For days, my strength had been returning faster than the doctors predicted. I could move my hands. I could turn my head slightly. I could even open my eyes. I just hadn't done it yet. Not publicly. I needed one more day. One more opportunity to understand exactly what was happening. That opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Around noon, my physician entered with 2 nurses. They ran their usual tests, checked my responses, monitored my progress. Then the doctor spoke words that changed everything. "Emily, if you can hear me, try opening your eyes." I hesitated. The room felt suddenly smaller. This was it. The moment everyone had been waiting for. Slowly, I opened my eyes. Bright light flooded my vision. Everything appeared blurry at first. Shapes,
Colors.
movement. Then the faces became clear. The nurses smiled. The doctor looked genuinely thrilled. "Welcome back, Emily." For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trapped inside my own body. I wanted to celebrate. Instead, I focused on survival. Because the game had changed. An hour later, my father rushed into the room. The moment he saw me awake, tears filled his eyes. "Emily." His voice cracked. I had never seen him cry before. He grabbed my hand carefully. "I knew you'd come back." I smiled weakly. The emotion in his face was real. Pure relief. Pure love. Then my mother arrived. Her reaction was completely different. She hugged me, asked questions, acted concerned. To anyone watching, she looked like a devoted mother. But now I knew how easily she could perform. And when she realized I was fully awake, I caught something she couldn't hide.
Fear.
Just for a second, but it was there. That brief expression told me everything. She wasn't relieved. She was worried. The next day passed in a blur of examinations and congratulations. Everyone believed I was learning the truth about the past 6 weeks for the first time. Nobody knew I had already heard enough to change my life. Late that evening, a nurse handed me my phone. "Your father brought this from home." I stared at the screen. Messages, emails, records, answers. The investigation I had started from a hospital bed was no longer limited to conversations. Now I could begin uncovering the truth for myself. The moment I got my phone back, I started digging. The nurses thought I was catching up on messages from friends. My father believed I was reconnecting with normal life. In reality, I was building a timeline, one piece at a time. The accident had stolen weeks from me, but not everything. Emails, text messages, calendar entries, and call records helped fill the gaps. The more information I reviewed, the more uncomfortable I became. Certain events didn't line up. 2 months before the accident, my father had called me repeatedly. Long conversations, several lunch meetings, multiple calendar reminders marked private discussion. I remembered fragments of those conversations, but not enough details. The accident had blurred parts of my memory. Still, one thing was obvious. My father had been trying to tell me something important. I continued searching. Then I found an email. It came from Thomas Bennett. The subject line read, "Updated documentation." Attached was a message confirming that revised legal paperwork had been completed. The date matched the period my mother and Uncle David kept discussing. My pulse quickened. I opened every related message. Each one revealed another piece of the puzzle. Then I noticed something strange. 3 days after the accident, several files connected to my father's office were accessed electronically. The timestamps appeared normal. The locations did not. Someone had logged into accounts from devices that didn't belong to my father. I took screenshots immediately. Then I discovered something even more troubling. A deleted message thread. Most of the content was gone, but fragments remained. Names,
Dates.
appointments, enough to establish a pattern. My mother and Uncle David had been communicating constantly during the weeks after my accident. Far more often than they ever had before. The timing alone raised questions. Late that evening, my father visited. I showed him nothing. Not yet. Instead, I asked simple questions. Questions about his office, his safe, his missing file. The look on his face told me everything. He was still searching, still trying to understand what had happened. After he left, I returned to my phone. Hours passed. Near midnight, I found the breakthrough. A scam receipt attached to an old email. Most people would have ignored it. I didn't. The receipt placed someone inside my father's office building on a night they claimed to be elsewhere. For the first time, I wasn't just collecting suspicions. I was collecting proof. And tomorrow, the family meeting would begin. The family meeting took place 3 days after I left the hospital. My father insisted on holding it in the conference room at his corporate headquarters. Neutral ground. No distractions. No excuses. When I arrived, everyone was already there. My mother sat at one end of the table. Uncle David occupied the chair beside her. Michael looked confused and uncomfortable. Thomas Bennett stood near the windows holding a thick folder. My father waited silently at the head of the table. The atmosphere felt tense from the moment I entered. Nobody knew exactly how much I remembered, and nobody knew how much evidence existed. My father began. "Thank you all for coming." No one responded. He folded his hands. "For weeks, I've been trying to understand what happened after Emily's accident." My mother's expression remained calm, carefully calm, the kind of calm that requires effort. Father continued. "Important legal documents disappeared from my office." David immediately leaned back. "Are you accusing someone?" "Not yet." Thomas stepped forward. "But we're asking questions." The room fell silent. Michael looked from one face to another. "What documents?" My father answered. "Updated estate and ownership records." Michael frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." Thomas opened the folder. "Before we discuss the missing file, there are several facts we need to establish." My mother's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in her composure. Thomas continued. "The documents were confirmed inside Richard's office 3 days before Emily's accident." He placed several papers on the table. "After that, they disappeared." David crossed his arms. "That proves nothing." "No," Thomas agreed calmly. "It doesn't." The response seemed to surprise him. Thomas wasn't arguing. He was building. One step at a time. One fact at a time. My father remained silent. Watching. Waiting. Then Thomas produced another document. During our review, we discovered unusual activity involving office access records. Mother shifted in her chair. Only slightly. But I noticed. So did my father. Multiple visits occurred after business hours. Thomas continued. Visits that don't match previous statements. David's confidence began fading. Michael looked genuinely shocked. "What is going on?" Nobody answered immediately. The silence stretched across the room. Heavy, uncomfortable, dangerous. Finally, Thomas closed the folder and looked directly at my mother and Uncle David. "For weeks, you've both insisted you know nothing about the missing documents." He paused, then added quietly, "Are you absolutely certain that's the story you want to keep telling?" And for the first time, neither of them had an answer. The silence after Thomas's question felt endless. My mother stared at the documents on the table. Uncle David looked down at his folded hands. Neither seemed willing to speak. Thomas finally broke the silence. "Then let's continue." He opened a second folder. This one was much thinner, but judging by the tension in the room, it was far more important. We obtained security footage from the office building. My father's eyes never left my mother. Michael looked completely stunned. David swallowed hard. Thomas placed several printed images on the table. These still frames were taken the night after Emily's accident. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Thomas slid one photograph forward. The image showed the building lobby. The timestamp was clearly visible. Then he placed down another. And another. Each picture told the same story. A person entering after business hours. A person heading toward my father's office floor. A person who shouldn't have been there. Michael leaned forward. His face went pale. "Mom." My mother closed her eyes. Only briefly. But it was enough. The room already knew. Thomas continued calmly. Building access records confirm the same individual entered 3 separate times. David suddenly spoke. "This proves nothing." Thomas nodded. "You're right." For a second, David looked relieved. Then Thomas delivered the blow, which is why we also interviewed building security. The relief vanished instantly. Thomas handed another document to my father. Security personnel identified both visitors. Both visitors. Not one.
Two.
My father's expression hardened. David. The single word carried years of disappointment. Years of trust breaking apart. Michael looked at his father in disbelief. You were involved? David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. At last, my mother spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The confession landed like thunder. No denial. No excuses. Just surrender. Thomas quietly placed one final folder on the table. The missing file was recovered yesterday. Everyone froze, including me. My father slowly opened it. The updated will. The ownership records. Everything intact. Years of planning collapsed in seconds. Then I stood. Every head turned toward me. My heart pounded. I heard everything, I said. The room went completely silent. I heard it while I was in the hospital. My mother's face drained of color. David looked horrified. And for the first time since the accident, nobody was controlling the story anymore. The truth was, nobody spoke for several seconds after my confession. The room seemed frozen. My mother stared at me as though she had seen a ghost. Uncle David looked equally stunned. My father simply sat there, absorbing everything. Finally, he broke the silence. How much did you hear? I met his eyes. Enough. The single word carried weeks of frustration, fear, and disappointment. Thomas Bennett quietly closed his folder. There was no reason to continue presenting evidence. The truth was already sitting in the room. My mother lowered her head. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Not powerful, not confident, just defeated. Michael turned toward her slowly. You knew about all of this? She didn't answer. That silence hurt him more than any explanation could have. Then he looked at Uncle David. You did too? David rubbed his forehead. We were trying to protect the family. The excuse sounded weak the moment it left his mouth. My father shook his head.
No.
His voice remained calm. But you were trying to control the family. No one argued, because everyone knew he was right. For years, assumptions had quietly guided decisions. Expectations had been built around a future that was never promised. And when my father made a different choice, resentment took over. The consequences came quickly. Thomas explained that the recovered documents would remain secured under legal supervision. The estate plan would proceed exactly as my father intended. No changes. No interference. No more opportunities for manipulation. Uncle David lost his position overseeing several family business interests. Michael voluntarily stepped away from discussions involving the company until everything settled. To his credit, he accepted the truth better than anyone. My mother faced the hardest consequence. Not legal, personal.
Trust.
The one thing she spent years damaging. My father looked at her across the table. The sadness in his eyes was impossible to miss. I don't recognize the person you've become. Those words hurt her more than any punishment. Tears filled her eyes. But nobody rushed to comfort her. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. When the meeting finally ended, I walked out beside my father. For the first time since the accident, the uncertainty was gone. The secrets were exposed. The lies were finished. And although our family would never be the same again, the truth had finally given us something we hadn't had in a very long time. A chance to begin healing. 3 weeks after the family meeting, my father invited me to his house. For the first time in months, the atmosphere felt peaceful. No whispered conversations. No hidden agendas. No tension hanging in the air. Just the two of us sitting on the back patio, overlooking the lake. The evening sun reflected across the water, while a cool breeze moved through the trees. My father looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. The past several months had taken their toll on him. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me a sealed envelope. I wanted you to have this. I turned it over. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. When did you write this? I asked. A few months before your accident. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter. A personal letter. Not legal paperwork. Not instructions. Just words from a father to his daughter. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. He wrote about the day I was born, the first bicycle I learned to ride, the nights he stayed awake helping me study, the pride he felt watching me build my career. Every page carried memories I had almost forgotten. Then I reached the final section, the part that mattered most. If you're reading this, it means life has probably become complicated. Maybe people are questioning my decisions. Maybe they're questioning yours. I want you to remember something. The reason I trusted you was never money, ownership, or business. It was character. You have always chosen honesty when dishonesty would have been easier. You have always chosen responsibility when excuses were available. That is why I believed in you. I lowered the letter slowly. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, my father smiled. I meant every word. The tears came then, not because of the inheritance, not because of the betrayal, but because after everything that happened, I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me all along. The real legacy was never the company. It was trust. Over the following year, life slowly improved. My recovery continued. The family business stabilized. Some relationships healed. Others never fully recovered. My mother and I remained in contact, but things were different. Honesty had replaced pretense.
Painful at times.
Necessary always. Looking back now, people often ask whether I wish the accident had never happened. The answer surprises them. Of course, I wish I had never suffered. But if I hadn't woken up in that hospital room and listened before opening my eyes, I might have spent years living inside a lie. Instead, I discovered the truth. And sometimes the most important thing I heard in that hospital room wasn't the lie that broke my heart. It was the truth that finally set me free.